Good afternoon. The sign-up sheet is going around, so people should be signing up for the things. We're a little short. I think we have 14 students here, maybe 15. So we're kind of little. I said, remember, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, we're 14, so therefore we're a little. I'm missing, so no, I'm not missing anyone. So we're about 6 little absences. So starting next week, we'll be having quizzes at the beginning of the class. So I hope you warn your friends they should get their butts here on time, so you'll have less time to do it. I plan to give you no more than 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes for the quiz at most. And that they'll be given straightforward right from the beginning of the class, and then we'll start class with after the quiz. So it's pulled in. I was going to do the quiz today, but we had some problems with I didn't finish something I needed to cover, so I said, okay, I can. Actually, I had leeway in this regard because the quiz can be given on week 3 or week 4. Because of how the quiz questions are designed in that sense. So therefore, it's usually the quiz questions are always going to be prior to the quiz week. So it's testing on what you paid attention to and what you read, okay? Not sure what you're going to read in that sense. Okay, I need to finish up one theme in. No, I don't need that. I just have to go here. This is something we touched on, but I need to go about it a little more clearly. And that is the fundamental larger scale social networks that emerged because of human anthropological and social political development, okay? In other words, the two structures of human political development that we know before the emergence of political institutions or political structures was understood mostly through first tribe. The tribe is an extension, as he says, is an extension of the family in that sense. It's an extension of the clan kin relationship. Okay, tribes therefore they are homogeneous in character. They're fundamental. By homogeneous I mean they're basically of the same genetic stock. Okay, in other words, there's not going to be great diversity in characteristics. They're going to be from the same family lines mostly. Okay, from the same family lines, same kin groups, kin structures, and things like this. So they'll be homogeneous, usually from the lineage of the same family kin stocks. Usually the population will be composed of cousins, you can say, right? Distant cousins, but maybe even distant cousins. One of the things is ruled through kin relations via brotherly or cousinly rule of equals. Thus, because it's rule over kin, right? Because it's rule of kin and because it's so homogeneous, sharing the same language, customs, and behaviors, there's not going to be need for coercion or violence. Very little coercion or violence. This is one of the first social understandings of the connection between the need of coercion. The more diverse, the more different or more diverse a population, the more often to create order or to create some structure of, coherence, violence is necessary. Or some levels of coercion are required. Okay, it can here you can say the coercion that is present in homogeneous structures is usually peer pressure. So you can say some people argue there's always coercion. And you go, yeah, there's even in the family there's coercion. But the coercion here and that would be more like peer pressure, social pressure, kind of feelings of guilt or non-belonging or exclusion, right? In other words, it's not going to be necessarily physical violence. Physical violence in a homogeneous, highly homogeneous environment, there's going to be very little need for coercive violence. This is different in very heterogeneous structures. Okay, so therefore that's the other thing. And then he goes, what about this? Custom and tradition reigns over any need of written law or formal law. So therefore in tribal societies you're not going to have high levels of written law or law and rules. It's going to be usually oral or customary norms, okay, traditions that are usually handed down by the family. In tribal societies, it usually depends. It's usually sometimes it will be the elder fathers, but maybe the elder mothers who will be the kind of remembering of the stories. Okay, the idea of the stories, the narrations, in a sense, and that these whoever is the priestly class. Okay, the idea of the priestly class will be tied to it. Religion. Is a religion that emerges in tribal societies is either primitive spiritual worship or ancestor worship. Again, therefore, the so-called people who have authority to tell memory, to tell the stories of the family or the tribe, will be the ones who will tend to have the moral authority, the spiritual authority within the things. And it says oral communication and storytelling rather than written language is the norm in these structures. Okay, tribal societies are usually familiar in that sense, structures around the family relationships and bonds and kin relations. Because one is ruling over kin, rule seeks for the good of the tribe. Rule is by elders and is very concerned with intergenerational succession. So therefore the question of succession of the next generation, the future. In other words, tribes are tied to the survival and the well-being of the clan. Again, this is very similar to the well-being of the family. Okay, so tribal has the structure of behavior for the group. That it seeks the same group's benefit and preference. Okay, human beings want group preference. You are trained not only to your own genetic preference, in other words, in fact, that's the whole point. That the group is an extension of your genetic preference structure because it's all connected with this. So therefore, some members of the community, this is the famous line from Richard Dawkins and his selfish gene and the idea of how this genes work, right? There's a problem here is that Dawkins always said that it's only individual selection. Okay, and this is the big problem, and the argument is he argued that groups have no replicative aspect. In other words, the group itself doesn't replicate, does not breed. The group is nothing more than an aggregation of a thing. So therefore, the larger tribe is merely an aggregation of the individual members. So therefore, the real reactive aspect is the individual agent breeding, okay, and replication in that sense. Now the problem with this is, okay, the answer to this is that yes, that's true, but then the group itself reinforces and makes survival capacity. So the individual without the kin group would not, like the individual by themselves would not likely survive and be able to reproduce. So therefore there becomes a dependence, an interdependence for the sake of being able to reproduce or replicate, okay? Genetic replication. So therefore the impulse gene is going to be that yes, genes are always going to seek their advantage. They're going to seek their maximum advantage for the sake of improving and surviving, right? But at the same time, there will be, because of this, and we know this from the works of people like Robert Axelrod and his works on the evolution of cooperation, showing how can you get selfish actors to cooperate. And the actual is you create a situation of interdependency. By the creation of interdependency, what happens is you see your survival in the survival of your kin, particularly your cousins. So therefore you will have people who will, this is why mothers and adults sacrifice for the sake of their children. This is why brothers sacrifice, or brothers and sisters will sacrifice themselves for their kin group, okay? Cousins, in other words, therefore, this idea that they see, therefore, in fact, this is what this also explains why homosexuality probably emerged genetically in the evolutionary structure as a mechanism to take out a certain percentage of the community population from the breeding operation, but having them serve the family. Okay, you understand? Therefore, the reason why evolution or nature created homosexuality in this sense, or non-mating, human beings who will opt not to reproduce. They will have attraction not to the reproductive party, but the non-reproductive party, and therefore this will lead to what? The fact that they will not pass their genes on, and therefore how they will do is they will often serve they will actually usually work or benefit the larger group. They're sacrificial in the sense. This is the evolutionary purpose of this. There tend to be this, and that's why we have to understand this. That therefore, at one level, the nature of rule is involuntary, but since all are related by blood, there's shared or common interest between the members of a tribal community. Okay, so the tribal we understand this as kin-based structures of this, and this is the level that emerges out of families. It is the emergent structure of things like, we'll say this, hunter-gatherers will form into tribes, but so also will herdsmen, but also in the terms of that, the beginning, even agricultural societies will still maintain tribal structures. Why? Because the tribe is still a very effective, larger unit of cooperation. Okay? But the problem with it is limited. It's limited because of how it can survive and like this. So therefore, what's so interesting is at the hunter-gatherer and herdsman level, tribal units are very small. You can probably get no more than they will survive. They will start to break down. They will start needing to separate and differentiate above 1,500, about 1,500 to 3,000. Okay? In other words, because of the ability to forage food or even to, in other words, hunter-gatherer tribes will be smaller, much smaller, about 40% smaller than herdsman tribes. And herdsman tribes will be about 40% smaller to maybe 30% smaller than what? Agrarian tribes. Tribes who have agrarian agriculture. Agrarian agriculture can actually even do something else. Once the agrarian agriculture develops and grows and develops and matures, what it can do is then therefore it can expand. It can basically all of a sudden, instead of just be 30% higher, it can be 400% higher, 500% higher. In other words, you can have the tribe, because of the ability to produce food in an organized sense, and in other words, to produce resources for sustenance, will allow for a smaller amount of property, land use, to generate bigger amounts of food supplies to feed larger number of peoples. So therefore, the initial stages of agriculture will be only slightly efficient. But as agricultural knowledge increases, and its understanding of the way, and the knowledge and success, efficiency of agriculture increases, then the size of what can be fed and annually maintained of a population dramatically, exponentially increases. Okay? And this will make larger scale social. In other words, it's only with when tribes are basically hunter-gatherers and this, they cannot grow too large. In order to survive, they'd have to break up into smaller units and go off in different directions to go look for other land, go into different directions, hunt other lands, gather other lands, forage their animals over other lands, okay? Because if they stayed together, they would not be able to feed themselves or feed their animals, okay? Okay, this is the nature of limits that nature itself presents. It's with the agricultural revolution, which begins man's cultivating land, developing it, and producing product, leads to an exponential return higher than nature, what nature itself develops. So now, therefore, what happens? We talked about this. Empires. What are empires? These are basically, it's one tribe or a warrior band ruling over many different people, different tribes by conquest. So therefore, its character will be much more homogeneous. Heterogeneous, diverse. Okay? Because of this, it's unlimited in attention. The nature of a tribe is in other words, natural ability of resources fundamentally limits, and it's also kin-based relationships, limits how tribes can go. Here, because this is done through conquest and force, basically, there's no limit here. The only limit is the ability of force, right? In other words, limited only by the ability to keep control over their subjects. In other words, this is the idea is that your ability to grow is limited by your ability to control. Your size will depend upon the effectiveness of control, and that may also mean access to being able to feed. If you can't feed the population that you're ruling, that's going to be bad for you, okay? That's going to lead to collapse. So therefore, what usually happens with empires, it usually always happens at the agricultural stage, okay? But now what's interesting, it's rarely the agricultural people themselves that become the empire base. Okay? That's even the more interesting phenomenon. That it's usually not the agricultural population themselves, because where will the agricultural populations tend to come from? They'll usually be found in plains, flat areas of high density resources, and they will have. But these geographic locations and structures will make them very easy subjects to conquer when a organized war band comes into play. And war bands will probably more likely be by the time by time livestock development occurs around the thousands, the war bands will be when is the first known horse riding? I think it's around 1000 BC. I mean, that's the evidence. So I know there's some evidence that you don't really have proper stirrups until even after the Roman Empire. Okay, that's even the Romans around times of the Greeks and Romans, you have primitive mechanisms, not the real organization of like saddles and stirrups that will arise in the Middle Ages. Okay, in other words, you have there's riding of animals and riding of that, usually bareback or like this, and therefore it required great skill to keep on the animal. But war bands that exist, and we know that the war bands existed around 1000. There is some anthropological evidence to go as early as 1200 BC, but there's a big debate about that based on the dating of the fossils. Okay, so it's clearly about 1000. We have lots of evidence saying 1000, around 1000 BC, but not like this. Now, because of its structure, the rule by coercion over tribes and people it dominates over. Okay, it rules by coercion, force, domination, dominion. Okay, it's basically the ambition of whoever is the principal power that's beyond it. Usually a war leader, a tribal leader. It could be a tribal leader. It could be a war band leader. someone who has ambition for power, and because it's an aspect of usually emanation from his own ambition or the tribe's ambition, it will seek, at one level, it does seek universal control and dominion over all. Okay, this is one aspect. It has, therefore, there is it's tied to the desires. It's a desire for everything, the desire to dominate and rule, and therefore it has the psychological impulse that the actor will behave, has an unquenchable need for more. Okay, that's what makes it universal in that sense. But there is a limiting factor, and the limiting factor is the ability to control and the ability to support. And remember, the connection between the ability to support and the ability to control. If you can't support and maintain, you won't be able to control. And if you're not able to control, you won't be able to support and maintain. There's kind of a chicken-egg problem there. Now, its rule is of a relative despotic character. In other words, despotic means like master, like slave. It's like a master, ruler, servant, ruler, slave character. Not equal. It's a not equal rule, moderated by the need to keep control over various subjects. Now, it is at this time, this idea of empire, will there emerge what we would consider culture and civilization? Okay, why? One of the first things that happens in empire is it will use organized religion. It will make priests, and it will create divinities and structures, sometimes tied to the ruler themselves, but often sometimes some kind of religious class, and a formal priest class, formalized priest class. That doesn't, in other words, usually religion in primitive and tribal societies are not really that formalized, not many ritualized. There's not much rituals. If there is basically primitive tribal structures, usually due to ancestral religion, worship of ancestors. Here, it will be the organized religion is why. And this is something I would recommend looking at. Michel Gauchet's writing, Primitive Religion and the Origin of the State. There's something about the divine in the way of God, of this idea of mystery and awe, right? Awe, reverence. In other words, the early founders of empire understood the power of the divine as something, and as not only power, as a source of power, but also a source of reverence and in other words, people would look up to it, respect it, understand. In other words, they would be, and therefore the priests would have authority over them, right? The priests could shape their beliefs, shape their opinions. In other words, but also it gives them a common. This new religion that the empire makes, or this develops, that is established here, is something that all tribes will share, and it will be in common for them. It will not be localized based on. See, primitive religions and tribal level is always tribal. Anyone who goes to study the American Indians and look at their religious practice or any primitive side, you will notice that even though it's primitive, it's also tribe-centric. And they always joke their name of the band always means in their language human being. Okay, you ask what the best way to translate what the name of their tribe would mean. It would be like human being. Okay, we are the human beings and they're not. Okay. Okay, that's one of the most fundamental understandings of tribes. Tribes only view themselves in this idea of we are the people, we are the human beings, and those are someone other. Okay, what occurs in here is a destruction of the otherness by the creation, by force and coercion of a collective. Okay, the collective is the empire. It is that structure. It uses things like religion. It will develop written law, writing, written language. Written languages emerge not among tribes. Tribes never really, there's no known tribes that develop organized written language. Now you may have tribes there are tribes that will have written language, but it will be something they took when they were part of an empire. And in other words, when the empire broke down, tribal structures will reassert themselves, right? But they will remember what they had with the tribes. They will, with the empire, they will remember some of the practices and things they had with the empire, and in doing so, they will perpetuate because it's useful. It's useful, but they will then modify it to tribal life. Okay, so therefore, this is how we understand organized religion, writing, things like this. It will often use organized religion, writing, written law, great public projects as a means to manifest powers of the rulers. And this is the origin of what we consider civilization. This is what we say, we talk about civilizations, right? We talk about, in other words, civilizations tended to emerge out of these empires. The first civilizations emerged out of these empires. They had their unique specific culture. They brought in certain things like sciences and the arts. In other words, sciences and the arts don't develop in tribal societies. They develop in these larger heterogeneous structures, which gives different opinions, different beliefs, and trying to understand different things. The nature of rule is highly involuntary, given much of the subjects are subjects through conquest. Also, the ruling elite tends not to allow subject peoples or tribes to rise to levels of import within the empire. And if they do allow such, it is usually due to a power shift within the empire from one tribe to another, or one family to another, okay? So either one family, clan, or group to another group, or a tribe. A new tribe has come up and turned to control of the empire, and it holds together. Okay, in other words, that there was you'll have very little vertical change in empires. What change there will always be horizontal, where maybe and if there is vertical change from the dominating or ruling part to that, it will be usually elements just underneath, slightly underneath. Usually elements that the ruling element or the rulers depend upon greatly. And therefore, if they become weak, what will happen is there will just simply be a power shift. Okay? In this understanding. The nature of rule is despotic in character, right? He says, yet it's moderated by institutions like religion, culture, written law. But it's the design of the empire is to benefit the ambition and goods of the group that controls the empire, rather than all the subjects of it, because it's despotic character. Remember, despotic rule is always only beneficial to the subjects accidentally. The design is always the benefit of the rulers and the organization, okay? And the power structure to maintain the power of the ruling element and the imperial element to keep it strong enough to keep control. It will allow or encourage the benefit of the larger scale when that is useful or safe for the ruling element. So therefore, it's only accidentally beneficial. The subject of the empire benefits from peace and security. Yes, that's true. The empire is secure. And any other benefit subject peoples are again is accident, as I said, accidental in character. Now, I wanted to go over that because the themes of this, the types of rule. Back to the question of the types of rule, the fundamental types of rule. We can argue that there's basically parental rule, despotic rule. Parental rule is basically the rule of children. It's voluntary. as the example here is love, caritas, or agape, agape in the Greek, caritas in Latin, of the father, parent, child, parent/father. You can say mother too, but it's usually that's what we take. The language itself always suggested the father, but then we can also understand the parent-child relationship. It's two dimensions in that section. Echoes the love of God for His creation in that sense. The idea is that therefore the benefit is for the who benefits. It benefits the thing that's ruled. The ruled benefits. Where despotic rule benefits the master. This is the master-slave, or the master-ruler, the ruled subject, and the slaves and subjects always benefit only accidentally, not intentionally. The design is always to benefit the ruler, despotic rule. Where, again, both paternal rule and despotic rule are involuntary. It's not, in other words, it's a form of involuntary rule. Now, of course, we have thanks to certain cultural devices and some, there's a lot of nonsense going on in social psychology because of Deleuze and others about the study of sadomasochism and the idea that sadomasochism lifestyle is a form of voluntary relationship. No. This is a deviation. This is not a normal behavior. By norm, I mean statistics. In other words, most people, the larger scale of a society and a distribution of a thing, that kind of things is not healthy or normal. They are deviant. They are atypical and deviant. Okay? And also they represent a kind of pathological misassociation that assumes usually pain with pleasure. Okay? It's a kind of, maybe there's something, you can very easily, human genetics isn't perfect, okay? You can be born with a mistake in your code, in the genetic code in you. And that mistake can have a situation, and it can also be caused by certain things of this can be caused because during pregnancy, the mother either exposed the child to too much estrogen or too much testosterone. In the early weeks of pregnancy, if a mother all of a sudden is flushed with estrogen, remember, estrogen, though it's the emotional thing, it's also abortive. Actually, in other words, if a child survives an estrogen surge, usually doesn't. A fertilized egg will probably be, an estrogen surge will normally be expelled. Okay, estrogen is that's what birth control pills and these devices are usually high levels of estrogen. Okay, so therefore estrogen is one of those things. If you get exposed to estrogen, this can adversely affect the development of the child, both not only physiologically, because in the early stages of development in the womb, what's happening is the child is developing its sexual organs and sexual activities, and therefore that is what leads to that the parent, and therefore too much testosterone can lead to another direction. Okay, so testosterone and estrogen, these things can lead to structural physiological deformities at the level of the structural in these things, and that leads to certain behavior traits. We also know this is about other things. Like you can also have certain defects. We know the development of the brain. If you get exposed to too much lead or heavy metals as a child in the womb, you will become sociopathic. The most violent criminals, if you look at their brains, they always have high levels of metals in their brains. In other words, the studying of lead and heavier metals are very much a kind of, in the human bloodstream, and particularly in the brain, produces high levels of mental instability. So therefore, if you look at this reality, you understand how human culture develops and why it destroys itself. Okay, And therefore, paternal rule, despotic rule, these are the involuntary. Now, we talked about economic rule. Economic is basically voluntary, wholly voluntary. It's based upon the concept of the buyer and the seller. There's mutual interest. The buyer and seller, the economic relationship is always an exchange of goods, an exchange of services. Goods, services, and labor, and things like this. It is always a binary exchange between a buyer and a seller. And this is a free exchange. That the second there's any coercion or deception involved, it invalidates the agreement. And the agreement will only happen when both parties are satisfied. And the thing about this is, because we don't read each other's mind, and because the things we do is subjective, and because when we make a choice, sometimes there's a difference between what we want versus what we will accept. Okay? What we want to get, this optimal higher amount, versus the amount we will take, right? Because of this range of this, what can happen, and this happens at the same level of both parties. This can even therefore happen that you don't have to like each other, you get agreement not because people like each other, you get agreement because both parties believe that they are benefiting from the exchange. And they will only agree if they believe that they're benefiting or getting what they want. So you don't necessarily have to love the other person or like the other. In fact, you can even hate the other person, and you can even think you're cheating the other person. Because it's subjective. Because it's the actors are subjectively understanding what, and value is there's no objective value. This is where Marx goes cuckoo. And actually, this is where a lot of early economics, the idea that that the goods or things have objective value. Because the value of this is purely subjective to the individual want. How much they want it. How much you want it is a subjective level. The want of the value or the worth of the thing will always depend upon the subjective value of the actor. And different people will have different valuations of the different things. In other words, a pen like this doesn't. The value of it will be depends on many things. So I know this is like they say this is a pen that a friend gave me. Therefore, I will value it higher because of my experience of where it came from, versus a person who doesn't know about that, doesn't know the person, and has no similar attachment, right? Things of ancestral things that go, father gave you the watch or grandfather's watch, right? Well, maybe the watch would be valuable as an antique, but not. The problem is that the person whose memory is tied to it will pay or attach more value to it than the person who does not have those memories or those attachments. As the antique, they may share it. In fact, not even that. Some people will value it as an antique, others won't. They will look at it and see old junk. I have a joke. I have a friend. He works in the ministry. We've been friends for a long time. We met in America many years ago, over 30 years ago. And he's now a senior civil servant, about to be retired. They're going to force him out of his job soon, retire him. And he has a habit. His habit is he likes buying gas lights, old-fashioned 18th century gas lights, and he will spend 8,000 zloty on this obscure gas light thing. And then what does he do? He then converts it into electricity, so it can be used in his house. His house. Now, God, would I spend 8,000 zloty on a piece of junk like that to convert it to lights? No, you understand? My wife and I my wife, who's this basically a nice Silesian, has a Prussian or Silesian Prussian, Polish, but has like the Silesian Prussian mentality about money and things. He looks, 8,000 zlotys for that? No, okay. And I'm a New England Yankees. Who looks at that saying, no. I'm not going to spend that much money for that kind of thing. Now, maybe I would like it if my grandfather had it. My grandfather or my ancestor had it, and I inherited it through the family. That would be one thing. But to go out and buy some obscure thing just because you like that kind of thing, that is a subjective perception. And therefore, this is why the nature of economy always rests on a subjective structure of this, and this is why it's always voluntary, never coercive. Therefore, when you hear Marxists say, "Oh, the workers are being oppressed," now that's slavery. If that was slavery, then they're slavery, and they would get no money or get almost nothing. Okay, that you're forced and coerced to work. Most people, the argument is, they wouldn't have any ability to survive if they didn't take the job. That's not okay, maybe, but they could go and move elsewhere and bring their labor to another place to see they'd get better. In other words, as long as you have the ability to move and freely go transit. Now, if you're arguing that the people can't move, right, and they're bound by whoever is the landlord or that's not free labor. That's serfdom, which is a form of slavery. Okay. So therefore, the idea, if the working classes can move and are free to move, to go to new places, to negotiate their wages and that, then they have choice and they have the ability to negotiate. Okay, so remember, and that's the problem here. We have to always understand that the economic conception is completely voluntary and it's rested on mutual benefit. Now, the political rule, this is the problem. Political rule is a weird thing because it echoes it's similar to economics in this way, that it believes in the mutual benefit to all within the community. In other words, you're sharing a common benefit. You're sharing a benefit that is common and shared to all. Okay? Let me get this little drink in my throat. My wife says I should have water here, but I need my caffeine. I need my caffeine drug to keep me awake. Energy, man. Now, in other words, but it's unlike economic rule, when it's only voluntary, but it's benefactory. Here, political rule is mixed. Political rule involves voluntary and involuntary aspects. Okay. So in many ways, it combines aspects of political rule, tends to bring in aspects of not only economic rule, but also to some degree despotic and paternal rule. But not totally paternal rule. In other words, what happens? He says, violations of economic, paternal, and political rule leads towards despotic rule. So in other words, once you bring violence into the relationship, it's no longer economic, it becomes despotic. I'm going to see if I can get this. This is one of these things that you can get there. If you violate paternal rule, then it's no longer paternal rule, it's despotic. Okay. This is where the feminists get, they argue that they say that paternalism is a coercive rule. No, paternalism is coercive, but it's beneficial to the child. So it's not the same as despotic. In fact, when it becomes despotic, that is a violating the principle of. So usually the arguments, the child abuse, they say, in the argument you'll hear in the rhetoric against paternalism or patriarchy is that, it's force and violence against women. Well, no, that's not patriarchy. That's the violation of patriarchy. That is the antithesis of patriarchy, because the object of patriarchy is that the patriarch has to benefit those whom he rules over. Okay? And therefore the idea of the principle of patriarchy is always kingship. And kingship always aims at benefiting. The difference between when a king no longer benefits and acts despotically, he becomes a tyrant. The tyrant is acting despotically, is wholly despotic. He rules only for his own interests, his own desires and his own interests, at the expense of everyone else. So it's not therefore the argument about patriarchy does not actually describe patriarchy properly. It really points to the what we call the defect of it, and treats the defect as a norm. There's a difference. The norm is the norm. The norm is the condition that it claims to aim at. The deficiency is the violation of the norm. So therefore, when patriarchy violates its principles and starts no longer benefiting the subject, it becomes despotic. And the same thing with political rule in that sense. Political rule, there is involuntary aspects of it, but when it starts not benefiting the common, all, in other words, if it decides to only benefit the ruler or a faction that the ruler benefits at the expense of others, then the rule becomes less political and more despotic. So this is the dynamic in political rule. That as political rule ceases to benefiting the group collectively. Remember, the purpose of economic rule is common advantage. It's like economic. The purpose it's similar to economic, but it involves, unlike economic, it involves coercion, but not always. It's both voluntary. It's mixed. It only uses coercion to the degree necessary, and why often the argument is you use coercion because they're bad people. They're people who don't want to obey, even though they're benefiting. They want more. They want to grasp. This is the classic argument about the just person is the person who does not want to grasp for more than he deserves or she deserves. The person who wants to grasp for more or to deny something from someone else and willing to take it from something else to benefit themselves, this is the unjust person. And the classic idea in the ethics. The idea of the virtuous person is the person who who acts properly towards his peers, who seeks to do the right thing. Now, of course, the right thing may involve you benefiting from it and becoming better, but not at the expense of the other. Intention not to take away the good of another. Without, the argument is that without their consent, or without either their consent or by accident. In other words, if it's accidental. In other words, you intended, because you can intend something good, but it can produce the opposite result, right? This is as long as the desire was to do them well, but the result being but if you know that result is the case, then you don't really desire to do them well, okay? So therefore, that's the problem about this. That's the nature of this, and this is the nature of political rule. Now, this leads us. Oh, come on, what's going? Come on, nice computer, nice. Okay. This leads us to political community, which is the embodiment of the political. It is the form by which the political takes. Now, in the traditional understanding of the time, the first origins of the political was within the polis. Christian Meyer's classic book, The Greek Discovery of the Polis, the English translation published by Harvard, which I don't have you read because it's an impossible book to get. And I think I might have a scan of it, but it's a 500-page book, and it's not worth really. I've used other articles from it and things like it that highlights it. So okay, political community is mixed in its character regarding its formulation. It can be either homogeneous or heterogeneous in character. So therefore, that's the big difference. It can be mixed. The polis, civitas, or city is the original formation. It's based on this idea of the community who shares a life together. It's composed of people sharing some kin lineage, or it can be even different kin groups. So this is what in other words, this is where, in many ways, the city, the civitas, in that sense, was kind of like the empire, and kind of like the tribe. It was kind of a blending. In fact, the argument was that the city emerged after the collapse. In other words, originally the tribes, there was this great empire that happened over time, over what we call the Mediterranean, and then it collapsed. And then what happened was, because the empire mixed all these peoples together, it mixed all these tribes and entities together. Some areas were wholly one tribe, but then some other areas were very blended with peoples. Okay, so that it couldn't, so that tribe could not be the easy associations, and households were not enough. In other words, the idea is households are not sufficient enough a form of community to assure the being able to live well, that human beings are able to achieve their ability to flourish as human beings. They can, in other words, households help you to flourish, but they are not effective enough to totally provide the necessary ability to achieve the ability of people to achieve their full capacity as human beings, to flourish, to develop, to live well, to live and fare well, to do, and that's the famous upratina, to fare and do well. It's the famous, and the last word of Plato's Republic, upratina, that is to do or fare well, to live well, the good life. It is also mixed in its character of voluntary and involuntary in that sense, right? A polis, the Greek conception of polis or civitas was limited. There was a limit in its nature. Its terms of size, like tribes, thus it promotes a heterogeneous diversity among different communities. So therefore, the nature, because there's a limit to the size of the community. In other words, that the city can only be a certain size. Once it grew too large, it would fall apart, it would not work. Thus, it's not like the empire. The empire could grow as big as its power. In other words, whereas the tribe, it is like the tribe with a limit. And because the early tribe, because of its limit, led to what? The same tribe would create multiple here. Here, the city, the political form, the early political form, the original political form of the city, allowed for heterodiversity. In other words, the heterogeneous character of different communities. Once it grew too big, you'd send colonies off. These colonies would form a city of its own. There'd be sister cities and friends, or maybe even enemies after a time. Okay, that happened too. It also engages in, like this empire, in written law, public works, organized religion, and common culture and civilization. So therefore, this is interesting, that the city will have aspects of the tribe. In other words, it's characteristics of the tribe, its smallness, its size limitation, its diversity or variation, its particularness. It forms itself in a particular community. Okay, it's not universal in this fundamental sense. The city is. It forms its. In fact, there's a joke about this. The joke about this is the word that the Greeks developed and then the Latins continued it. It's cosmopolis, cosmopolitan, cosmopolis. Cosmos means what? The universe, everything. The polis. The polis and the it's like opposites. In fact, this is why natural law in Greek is a joke. Phusos and nomos. They're the antithesis. Phusos, nature. Law is conventional. It's particular. Physis is universal. So talk about natural law in Greek would be kind of like a joke, like military intelligence, right? Oxymoron, right? The cosmopolitan is similarly an oxymoron. It is a contradiction. The cosmopolis is a complete contradiction because the polis is always a particular place, whereas the cosmos is a universal. The tension between, let's say, we have this very much tension in the discussion of globalism and localism, right? The idea of the everywheres versus the somewheres. The somewheres have value in a particular place, a particular area. They get their identity and their meaning from that particular community in that area. But then there's the global population, the cosmopolitans, whose identity is universal. And this is the classic tension of today's reality. The other aspect, and therefore, like empire, they will engage in, they will have written, the political form will have written law, public works, organized religion, and common culture and civilization. So therefore, it gets the goodies of empire, but it's what? It's not despotic like empire. It's political. The nature of political rule is share rule. And that the word polis, okay, I should, there's a, okay, I'm going to do this, hold on. Where is it? There has to be an image here, hold on. I have an image about this. No. It's the word. There. Yeah. Okay, city-state, never. That's just a bad image. I would kill that if I was going to edit this. The word here is polis, comes from that is which began 2080 years ago. Around, it's actually, I would even date that even earlier. It's around, it emerged in Greece around the 5th, 6th century BC. What is this? It's polis. Now we translate it city-state, but that's a bad translation because we'll talk about this why. The next word is polites, citizen comes from it. The politicos, the political ruler, politicae, the art, politics is the art of citizenship and government, the politeria, the constitution or the kind of governing form, and the plutumina, okay, that's even wrong on that. The plutumina is basically the ruling faction, the ruling part. That's why I didn't use that. I said because I think I would change some of the information here is just wrong. Like city-state, I wouldn't use that. Politia is right generally, but polituma means literally the ruling part when we discuss about this. Now, why do I want to mention this in that sense? Because this is to understand that is the idea of citizens. What is a citizen? The typical understanding of rule is ruler and ruled, right? The one who rules and the one who is ruled, right? The idea of a citizen is not a citizen is one who shares in rule. The citizen is a ruler and a ruled. In other words, like the idea, you will be first ruled, and then when you are capable, you will rule. And because people will be the idea of to rule and to be ruled in turn. A citizen is one who will rule. He's both ruler. He is a ruler, in that he participates in rule, but he also will rule and be ruled in turn. Okay, terms. In other words, political power is understood as this common rule everyone shares. By the way, most of European society is not political. You are always been a oligarchic, aristocratic society of aristocrats who rule, and now they have political rule and a ruled class. If you don't share in the rule, you have to have a share in the, not just mere the idea you vote for them. No, you have to have the real authority. You are the one who gets to decide. That is what political rule means. You, all those citizens, everyone who is a citizen is one who shares in sovereignty, in the modern word sovereignty, the ability to decide and to determine what the community does. So therefore, the character of political rule is beneficial to the community. It's a koinonia. It's a shared common. It is a form. The word is, the political community is the kind of peak type of community where the human is able to, the idea is that the human being is able to achieve fulfillment in this thing. That's why the city is by nature. The polis is by nature. It's not by nature in the sense that it is by nature because it is that which fulfills human beings. Human beings are achieved to achieve their Pareto optimality of being human only within the framework of the city, or the polis in a sense. That you are able to share and rule, to rule yourselves. Self-rule. And therefore, and you're in a community that you're able to be sufficient in order to live well. Thus, the political as the overcoming the limits of the tribe and empire in a sense. This is the birth of the political. This is the birth of the political. The birth of the political is kind of like it's a Promethean moment, right? Where, like discovering a fire. To understand, in other words, fire is a natural thing. Fire is not artificial. But the understanding of what fire does and how it can be used, and how it can be used so humans can achieve power, to live better, to live well. That is the Promethean moment. To take it from the mere accidental to the ability to make fire yourself. That is the Promethean. And the rise of the polis is that kind of Promethean moment, where it is. Now, the argument is what probably happened was you had, and in the collapse of empire, what you had is you had remnants of the previous imperial institution. And when and tribes were just, you couldn't rule tribally on the continent. And particularly not the continent, but if you look at where Greece, go look at Greece. The land and the structure makes it very difficult. If you look how the topography of Greece, that's why it'd be useful to read the first book of Thucydides and the first few chapters of Thucydides' Peloponnesian War, where he describes the geography and the topography that prevents a tribe from becoming unified in any other way. You go higher in Thebes, above Thebes, to where today's Macedonia, Thrace and Macedonia. You would see they were ruled by tribes, but they never unified, because why? Tribal leaders, even though there were many tribes that were connected in similar lineage, they would refuse to become unified. It took someone like Philip of Macedon, who grew up not in Macedonia, but in Thebes, and was trained by the leader of the Theban democracy. And he then becomes a mercenary captain and takes over Thebes. And then goes back, and he's the son of the king who becomes king, and then he takes his knowledge of Theban arms to his warlords and unifies all of the Macedonian tribes into one rule, and then becomes the League. And then what he does, he conquers the rest of all the Greek cities after been spending 30, 40 years fighting each other. Spartan and Athens spending the 30, 40 years so fighting. By this time they're so depleted that not only does Thebes destroy Sparta, but in doing so, Thebes ultimately, when Thebes ultimately gets taken over by the adopted son, the adopted lover of their leading statesman, who is Philip, the lover. And then he becomes king of Macedon, and then he then conquers all of the Greek cities and unifies them. Then his son does what? Alexander, come on. Conquers Persia, the Persian Empire, the great Persian Empire, and basically establishes a global rule, then dies. Now, if you're going to establish a global rule, do it and die, because what happens then, his generals just divided everything and it became localized rule. But it had trade from India. Okay, you had global trade because of Alexander, and you had a global currency and a global market. You had global. That's the first origin of globalism is Alexander's conquest of that. It creates after he dies, the political form collapses, but the economic model did not, and that will continue. The trade from India to China to Europe will continue all until the 20th century. Okay, that is the golden road. So here is the dichotomy. Here is the alternative to politics embodied by the ancient Greek was the polis. The realm of the political offered a way to overcome the limits imposed by the tribe and empire dichotomy. The tribe was limited, it was voluntary, it could not grow. The empire was very much, could grow, but it was always despotic in character. The tribe offered no development mentally, capacity of its religion is primitive. It doesn't allow for the development of the mind. No language, no writing, no poetry. It's the empire who gives us writing, poetry, religion, culture, science. The polis takes the good of both and the limits of both too. So, what about this? Well, here is the politics is the in-between state, between the two things, he says here. This in-between state between the familiar parental rule as embodied by tribal and the dominance and submission required by imperial of the empires and Hamagic rule, the pre-classic. For the Greek, the classical world, the political was embodied by the polis. Whereas the moderns, the modern world, and that's the modern world. Okay, remember this. When do we say the modern world begins? Anyone? When does the modern world begin?
After the discovery of America?
No, that's 14. Even before that. 1492 is that. It's about the same time. The same time. In other words, it's not after. It is about this. It begins in the 15th century, the early 15th century, where you have the Renaissance, the recovery of the Greek and Latin. You had the fall of Constantinople, and then the recovery of all of a sudden this flood of Greek and Latin texts coming into the world because of the rise of Venice as the strong commercial zone. You had this desire to reinvent language. You also had the discovery of the New World, which did what? The discovery of the New World led to the understanding that the Greeks. Go read what Minogue Vespucci in his great letters, the fourth letter, where he says, the ancient world was wrong. The world is much bigger. The world, because remember, Ptolemy, Ptolemy and the early Greeks thought that the world was circular, right? They understood that the sun was, and the earth rotated around the sun, and then it was circular. They understood that, but they got the size of the earth wrong. No one thought there was another continent. That's even Columbus. Columbus thought he went to India. That's why he called them Indians, right? The West Indies. He landed on the West Indies, and he called these are the islands of the Indies. It was only Amerigo Vespucci, who, by the way, was what? He was a banker. He was from Florence, from the Florentine banks, and he was the principal financial banker, leading the financial arrangements for the Florentine banks that were paying. That Isabella was Queen Isabella, and her crown was financing the thing, but it was a deal with the banks. Okay, and Amerigo Vespucci went with Columbus, and then decided to go and then after Columbus's third expedition, after his second expedition, Vespucci decided to go on his own and finance his own 3 or 4 expeditions. And it's him, Vespucci, who realizes that he goes into what we call the tip of this. He goes out and discovers what we considered Venezuela today, and the coast there. He goes south. He flows down the river, and he goes to the Amazon basin, and he sees the mouth of the Amazon, and he says, this is not an island. The next trip, so he continues to south to a point like this. He maps the whole Amazon basin area. He goes back. He gets another trip to go to north, and goes all the way up to North America, and he says, this is he maps the first map of the American coast, and he calls it America. It's not Columbia. The new continent is not named after Christopher Columbus. It's named after Amerigo Vespucci. Vespucci writes that, my God, not only, remember what happened in the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages, the Greek science and Christianity, in other words, the church embraced Greek science as a justification of the church. It didn't like it always. It tried to suppress it when it might lead people to not believe. Hence the famous what happened to Galileo, right? Why the church didn't want Galileo to write about things, because if he just wrote these things to fellows, churchmen, and things like that, they wouldn't care. But he wanted to popularize it, and this was the danger of that. That's why it had to be suppressed, because most people wouldn't understand, and it would lead them to cease believing. Because the church, in other words, he was correcting some teachings of Ptolemy. Galileo did, right? He was correcting some Ptolemy teachings. The problem was Ptolemy, and what Ptolemy taught was now dogma. So when Vespucci comes and discovers the new continent, he proves, boy, did Ptolemy get it wrong. The ancients did not know the world. So not only does the church, in other words, this is what leads to in other words, the discovery of the New World was one of the things that would lead to not only an attack. I mean, they were already doubting it before the New World, but the New World was the proof. It was the discovery of the New World was the proof that the ancients really didn't know. The wise ancients didn't know about the New World, the size of the world. They got it wrong. And if they got this wrong, what else did they get wrong? So this led to doubting all of the teachings, both in philosophy, ethics, political teaching. This is why Machiavelli will say, listen, we can look at these ancient writers, I like them, they're great, but, because remember, what happened? By the time Aristotle finishes Politics, the polis is a meaningless term anymore. The polis ceases to be a vital political form with the rise of the hegemonic Alexander. First, it rises with someone like Philip, then Alexander, then what happens? Hellenistic monarchies, these large monastic, these large hegemonic kind of quasi-empires, then the rise of Rome. Rome, a city who becomes an empire, who becomes the cosmopolis. Okay? In other words, empire, a revision of empire exterminates the city as a form. And the Roman Empire achieves hegemony over Western Europe. But what happens? Like all empires, what happens to empire? Even though this empire is different from earlier empires, because why? It embraces the knowledge of the polis. It brings political things, like the political forms. They adapt it. The Romans themselves were a polis. So when a polis becomes an empire, it adapted the political characteristics of an empire. In other words, it adapted that to imperial rule. But what happened? It doesn't rule politically anymore. It changed its rule. Instead of ruling politically, it rules over its subject cities as master. It's no longer rules of citizens. And citizens, I mean, this is even the greatest thing of what becomes the Romans. Citizenship used to mean, in the Greek world, in early Roman world, it meant you shared rule. By the time of the Roman Empire, citizenship meant certain rights, certain privileges. You had as a Roman citizen, you had privileges. You couldn't just be crucified. You had to have in fact, the only way you can die as a Roman citizen is how? Does anyone know? Chopping your head off. The only way they can publicly execute you. They could not crucify you. Non-citizens and slaves, because a slave is a non-citizen, you can crucify a slave. You can't crucify a citizen. You have to first strip him of his citizenship status. So he has to be stripped. That's a major crime, and that's very rare. Usually it's easy just to kill him. You just say, okay, die. In fact, most Romans, in order to prevent themselves from being their citizenship and get dishonor, would prefer suicide. That's you allowed. In fact, that was the tradition was even before they'd kill you, they'd give you the knife first if you were a citizen. Okay, that was the tradition of this, how the Romans understood this. And this is political world. Now, this is the ancient world organized structures to be fundamentally understood as wholly consistent, are to be fundamentally understood as wholly consistent with modern ones. Only ancient ones are said that the argument is that they are by definition primitive and less developed than modern ones. This is the current viewpoint, right? This is the kind of modern viewpoint that there's a same. That's why they call it the city-states. Well, this is wrong. This worldview assumes that the present is the current state of human development of the past, reflecting man's ever-increasing knowledge and ability to shape and control his environment. Such a worldview distorts the past and colors it so that we don't see how the modern world was a radical break from the past. In other words, this idea that we are, the difference between the ancients and the moderns, the ancients polis and our modern state, it's only primitive. It's less developed. That's why they call it the city-state. This is why, and you have to understand there was a very much attempt in the 19th century, in the late 18th century, early 19th century, to cover up the fact that the modern science and modern thinking and modern politics was a radical break with the past. And we see this when we look at this politically and look at the difference between the political form, and also in philosophy too. You can look at the way reason operates. Look how, if you look closely at the operation of how reason and rationality was operated, you can see the big difference between the ancients and the moderns. The modern version radically reduces the scope of what reason can do. Its modern structure. It's radically reductive. And it's very limited. But in doing this, by limiting it, it also makes it more powerful and more precise and more commanding. So, we lead us to the problem. the polis. The ancient form is the polis. The modern political form is the state. The ancient form of the ancient form of the political. The modern form of the political. This polis is what? The body framed by a community, or Koinonia, or Gemeinschaft. German word Gemeinschaft, community, communitas in Latin, right? Koinonia, the Greek word, framed the community. It's a construction. A community is a organic structure. The state is the body of the state framed by a society. There's no equal Greek. There's no word that equals that. The closest word in Greece would be the idea of a league or a defensive alliance, an alliance, or the German word Gesellschaft. Okay, society. Now, the ancient polis was a discrete unit of parts, households held together by a ruling part. It's a discrete system. The polis is a construction of discrete unions, of households that are held together by a part that's ruling. Now, does this mean that is it unitary? Whereas the state is a unitary construct constructed via willing contracts, social agreements, that generates a union that all submit to and agree to be ruled by. So, what is the character of the ancient world? Is a discrete structure of discrete units that are commanded, that has a part that dominates or rules. Now, it can be ruled voluntarily or it can be ruled by coercion, but it's a ruling part. Whereas the ruling part is what? Nothing more than a representative of the collective. In other words, all the members, the individual members, collectively create the body politic by the act of agreeing to join. They will it. They're the individuals. All the individuals are the constituting power. They create the body politic, the state, or the society. In fact, that's the dirty secret. That state and society are Siamese twins. They're both constructed by the same structure. They are what? They're the state. It's a unitary construct via willing constructs. Contract, say the social contract is the classic argument, which generates a union that all submit to and agree to be ruled by. Now, the ancient form is tied to organic, the needs and the need to share a common life together. The body politic is a mere community of those who live together and thereby share a common life together. It's particular. In other words, the unit, the state, or this is time to agreement and collective willing. The body politic. It's a time to of agreement. I think that's a typo, but it's a time of agreement and collective willing of this. In other words, it's everyone's willing it to be. And once it is, you're shaped by it. Again, this is why society and state are kind of flipped elements of this. 2, this polis, the ancient form, is tied to the concept of citizens who are sharers in rule of a given political form or political given regime, a politea in that sense. It's because every political community has different types of political community, and therefore that's the different regimes, the different particulars. Now, for the modern state, the citizen in truth is in truth more a subject who possesses certain rights and guarantees. In fact, the Marxist, the kind of Marxist writer Helen Mearsham Wood, in her 2010 book, I think 2012 book, From Citizens to Lords, scopes the history of this out. During the Rome, a Roman citizen used to be, by the time of the Middle Ages, you're a lord. And if you weren't, those who weren't citizens, they became serfs. The non-citizens became the serfs in the medieval world. But sometimes citizens themselves who lost their community through conquest often became slaves in other empires, and therefore what happens, sometimes people who were citizens ended up becoming slaves. That was very common in Rome, remember that. The Rome conquered many cities, and that they would enslave their intelligent leadership, and they would, in fact, the Roman Empire was ruled by slaves, in fact. The people who ran the empire, that's the irony, that the ancient world, much of the actual day-to-day business life of most activities were not done by the citizens. It was done by the slaves. At the time of the empire, that most of the empire was governed by the day-to-day managerial running of the empire was really run by, and slaves sometimes in the ancient world were very rich people. Sometimes wealthier than some of the nobles, because they made their money in this structure. They were this property of this person. Therefore, now the idea about this was if my slave was rich, it said I was a powerful person. Okay, so therefore he had no incentive to destroy the rich slave, because it emphasized his power and his wealth and his ability. Not saying his wealth, but his power and his influence. Because a slave was obligated to do certain things, because he could kill him anytime he wanted. So therefore the slave would actually help his master out politically. And the masters didn't have, come on, most of the Roman aristocrats didn't care for money. Money was simply a means to do things. They weren't interested in making money. They were interested in having power and ruling over others. Political rule. So, now, this leads us to the famous thing I pointed about, Gemeinschaft, Gesellschaft problem, community versus society. One is organic, emergent from the environment, accidental and emergent, and rests on culture and tradition, tends to, right? This is Sonnes and Weber's response to Tonnes. Tonnes is the author who talked about Gemeinschaft versus Gesellschaft, famous book, in the turn of just before the 20th century. A very important book in sociology. Gesellschaft, which is our term for society, this is an artificially created to fit or need of our wants. It arises out of rational intentionality. This is why it's contractual, the idea of businesses and something like this. It rests on rationality in law, the idea here is. So this is taking Weber's three conceptions of tradition, culture, and legality. In other words, things that rest on tradition, culture fit more with Tonnes Gemeinschaft. Things that rely on rationality and law or legality is more Gesellschaft. But even Weber will kind of disagree with Weber will constantly even argue that Gemeinschaft has all three, would have all three forms of authority. In fact, he makes that. Weber likes the definition of the state, and this is why I'm going to bring in, his definition is that it's an organization that has the monopoly of legitimate use of force, of physical force over a territory. Hence the conception of sovereignty, the ability to carry action independently. And then a state is thus an institution that wields force to ensure order within it from a threat, right? This leads us to what one of the readings today is the second, it is the Max Weber's, the lecture, Politics as Vocation. This is the classic 1919 lecture. It's very good in that thing, but this is that famous line. He goes into and he goes, what is the state? He goes, what is the problem of the state? It's a political organization. He goes, the problem is relative to the political organization. A state can, sociologically speaking, not be defined. That's a big problem. There's almost no task that a political organization hasn't undertaken at one point or another. One cannot say that there's a task that has always been solely been in the hands of political organizations, today known as states, or the predecessors of the modern states. So he even understands that the state is historically developed. The concept of state is something that emerged at a moment in historic development. Okay, it is our concept. It is the concept that frames our understanding of political institutions. Thus, sociologically speaking, it's only possible to define the modern state in respect to one specific means innate to every other political organization. The physical force that includes the capacity to be violent. This is what Gestalt means, coercion, violence. Now, this famous line, the definition of state, he says, Trotsky once said at Litvak, the famous treaty that ended the First World War, right, with Russia and Germany, every state is founded on violence. That includes physical force. Okay. Trotsky sees that correctly. If there were only special entities that were unaware of the concept of Gewalt, or violence, right, as a means, especially in its implication to the use of violence, right, then the term state would cease to exist. Then something would have occurred, what we would call anarchy in a very specific word. But anarchy is not possible. Doesn't exist. In fact, Kolakowski would even say anarchy would lead to tyranny. In fact, even Hobbes says that. Hobbes' argument is that anarchy is so despised, human beings would rather submit to be slaves than to live under anarchy. That's why they formed the social compact, is to escape the anarchy of the anarchical nature of the state of nature, right? So therefore, now he says this, physical force is not, of course, is not normal, nor the only means available to a state. This is not what we are talking about. I'm saying that the physical force is specific and intrinsic to the state. And he says that, especially today, the relationship between state and physical force is a very intimate one. In the past, various entities, starting with the clan, have known physical force as a normal means. In other words, in the Greek world, private individuals can use force. In fact, every citizen is able of using a force. So therefore, if you thought that, in other words, in a pre-modern state, every citizen can exercise and enforce the law. So I think you're violating the law. I could grab you, seize you, and then bring you to the public forum and accuse you. Okay? Every citizen abroad could represent the city. The modern state doesn't like this. This is too much power in the hands of individuals who might abuse their individual interest at the expense of the common. The modern state centralizes all control, unifies it, and regulates it under the authority of the government, okay, which is a representative agent of the collective. And only governmental agents can exercise coercion and force. That's the ancient world. The ancient world, private citizens, everyone has the right to use force to protect themselves. Particularly the modern European view is that no, you can't use force. Only the state can use force. And when you use force, you're an enemy. You're a threat to the system. Only the state has the right to use force, the legitimate right to use force, over a specific territory. So that defines the state. It's territoriality, a given space, that I have to control it, I have to have authority, I have to control it, and I have the right to use coercion, violence. This is the Weberian definition of state. This is the modern construct. And this is why the modern understanding is, this is how reductionistic it is, right? It's unitary. It is a unitary structure. In fact, this is the difference. The nature of the willing agency of this will lead to a universality. Because who is the citizen? Well, it just matters of consent. As long as we consent, we can be a union. It doesn't matter. Only consent matters. Only consent matters. Therefore, we can have a world state. In other words, there's no limit to the structure of the state. Only consent. The problem with this is, but will everyone consent? What will prevent consent? Language, linguistic differences and class differences, things that people don't see each other as the same body. So you need to, if you're going to have a universal state, you need what? Universal language, universal consents of identity, universal shared interest. Okay? And this is something that the sociologists will understand much better than some people, is that only division of labor, I'll stop here. The division of labor creates the structure by which a complex, large-scale environment can exist. And then division of labor creates interdependency, and the word is Gesellschaft, society. And only in the Gesellschaft provided by this can the state emerge. So in fact, this is a horrible word in German. It's the Bundeslinkische Gesellschaft, which everyone translates bourgeois, the bourgeois society. No, this is the society of citizens, or people who share and rule. This is this idea of civil society and state are interconnected fundamentally in this structure. So we'll continue this next week. I'm sorry I went over. Have a good day. Next week there will be a quiz.